I don't know how famous. I'm retired, and once you're retired, you're not famous anymore. I'm grateful you're all here today, even though you're here by compulsion and to get your education, but hopefully it will make your time worthwhile. And I appreciate Brother Ritchie and his kind introductory remarks. I want to show you something I saw in the paper a couple of years ago, and I'll have to tell you that President Workman told me that as I give this discussion today that I need to make sure I remember my calling and to give it. So I've cleaned this slide up a little bit. So, but I saw this in the paper, and this is what it said. Dog for sale, free to a good home, excellent guard dog. Our owners cannot afford to feed him anymore as there are no more thieves, murderers, or molesters left in the neighborhood for him to eat. So if you have any problems in your dorms, I can give you the contact number for this. And what we're going to do is have somebody come and fix the computer because I just cut it off. Sorry, I've got to turn that around so I can see it. There's another interesting thing that I observed recently. We haven't lived in Hawaii for a year and a half, and when we came back, we noticed they have begun construction on another bridge the other side of Hauula. Have you seen that? Well, when I was here before, it took them 4 years to do the Hauula Bridge. And this time, they have begun another bridge, which is the other side of Hauula. And these are the dimensions of the bridge. I took a picture of the old bridge. And this bridge is about 15 feet high, 120 feet long, and the maximum speed there is 35 miles an hour across the bridge. You all know that. Here's an expressway bridge, and any of you who've been to France between Paris and Barcelona, you've traveled across this bridge. It's, the speed limit is 100 miles an hour. The bridge is 1,103 feet high, and it's 2 miles long. Now, what are the similarities between these two bridges? The time of construction is about the same. And given the costs in Hawaii, the costs are about the same. So I'm just kidding on that second point. But there are some engineering feats. We lived in Japan. I was the controller at Mazda. We lived in Hiroshima, and there's some phenomenal engineering feats that they've built tunnels that are 7-8 miles long. That you go through with the Shinkansen, the train, and it's a fascinating part of the world. Today I'm going to talk about 3 areas of interest to you. I call this things they never teach you in business school. So are there any faculty members here today? Good, I can speak freely then. First of all, integrity and a principled response. Secondly, the value of strategic thinking, and I should have capitalized that. And thirdly, where should I work when I leave school? I'm going to give you personal examples today because I think they're the best way to teach you the things that I encountered as an executive at Ford Motor Company and how I reacted to them or experiences, because you're going to have similar type of experiences in some of these areas. The first one, I was in Europe. I ran all the production scheduling and market analysis for Ford of Europe. We had about 30 countries, and it was a significant job. I had offices in London and Cologne, Germany. We had a corporate plane that flew us back and forth between those 2 offices, so I traveled there once or twice a week. The controller for Ford of Europe, I'm going to use his name here because you're never going to run into him, was Gerhard Klein. An important thing for automotive companies is what their share of market is, their penetration. So in other words, how many vehicles did Ford sell in a given month in comparison to all of the other manufacturers in Europe? Now, all the manufacturers in Europe sell between 8 and 12% of the market. And Ford is right in that band. You've got Fiat and Peugeot and Volkswagen and Audi and Mercedes, and all of these companies are all lumped into one area. And so it's very important what your share is, because your share determines how much penetration you're getting versus your competition. Gerhard called me up one day and said, because I published the numbers. He said, "What was our share last month?" I said, 9.7%. He said, "What was our share in hundreds?" I said, 9.742. He said, "Our budget's 9.8, rounded up." We need to report 9.8. What would you do? Here's a guy that I didn't work for directly, but was one of the three controlling leaders of Ford of Europe. I had never been asked in my career to fudge the numbers before that. What would you do? Think about it, because you may be asked the same questions when you get into business. I said, "Gerhardt, 9.42 does not round to 9.5, excuse me, 9.742 does not round to 9.8. He says, "Round it up." I said, "I will not round it up. If you've got some more sales that I can put in, more tickets, and it gets to 9.745, I'll round it up." He was extremely frustrated. I said, "You report whatever you want, but if anybody from corporate calls me, the number rounds to 9.7. Now, I was at a lower level at that point in time than Gerhardt was. What was I doing? I was reacting with a principled response. And I can tell you, it will never hurt you in your business careers. Let me give you a negative example. I'm just going to put USA member. I had working for me once in Detroit a young man that got his MBA from BYU. He finished top of his class. His graduate school scores on his tests going in were nearly perfect. I think he missed one question. Brilliant mind. He came from a very solid church family. His uncles had been mission presidents. His grandfather was a general authority. He came to work for me. He decided it was more important to fit in with the corporate culture than it was to stand his principles. So when we went out at night with the guys, he'd have a drink. His language deteriorated to be like everybody else. As brilliant as he was, he never rose above the level that he was at when he worked for me, because he didn't have the blessing that comes through integrity in the marketplace. Member of the church, made some bad choices. You're going to be faced with that. What kind of person are you going to be in the business place? I'll give you another personal example. I'm sorry for all the personal examples, but they are the only way I can teach you the benefits and the non-benefits of this type of living. When I was in Brazil, I was assistant controller of the largest corporation, privately held corporation in South America. I was called one day by President Hinckley and asked to be a mission president. Shock. I went to the company and said, "What can you do?" They said, "We don't grant leaves of absence." I was 42 years old. This was in 1993. I had 7 children. All of them were still in school. And Ford said, "You leave, you lose your job." That's a story for another time. It didn't happen. And they ultimately changed their corporate policy to allow religious leaves of absence because of the integrity that I think we exhibited in that case. But when I left Auto Latina, which was the Ford-Volkswagen joint venture, they had a going away party and they loved to roast me because there's lots of things that they can comment about that are a little out of the norm. And I didn't know, but the chairman of the company came to the party. And he got up. He wasn't scheduled to do a roast. And he got up and everybody thought, what's this guy going to say? He was a Belgian. He had run all of the nuclear energy facilities in Belgium before he came down to run this Ford-Volkswagen joint venture in South America. Very accomplished European businessman. He said something that was very interesting that I'll never forget. He commented about, he said, I want to tell you how much I admire Greg for taking this volunteer assignment. He didn't even know what it meant. He just knew it was an assignment to preside over a mission. He said, he is doing something that all of us inside of our hearts wish we had the courage to do. So when you look at your colleagues and they look at you and say, hey, wait a minute, this guy's kind of a little bit strange. He lives by these strange principles. Let me tell you, I believe that down deep, they're saying what Pierre de Schmidt said to me. They wish that they could have the courage to do what I was doing. And when he said that, everybody at that party were shaking their heads. Businessmen from Volkswagen, from Ford, from Argentina and Brazil, all of them, different cultures, saying that that was important. Let me give you another example. Earl Hesterberg, I worked for him in Europe. I had a tough job. I worked for the manufacturing and the marketing and sales vice presidents. Nobody wanted my job. It was the toughest job in Europe. Earl Hesterberg used to say to me, my objective in life is to get Greg to swear or to take a drink. But he says, I'll never be able to do it. He now runs the largest dealership consortium in the world. What kind of impact can you make? And I'm sorry, I'm not trying to toot my own horn. I'm just using examples, and I didn't have a lot of time to prepare, so you're stuck with my own personal examples. But what kind of example are you going to be? Are you going to go out there and are people going to respect you because of your integrity and your principled responses? Never compromise your standards. You will lose your competitive edge with your peers and with the Lord. And I have absolutely no doubt about that. I've been in the corporate world, one of the largest companies in the world. I've been able to be fairly successful in that company. And it's because of the principles and hard work that I've always lived my life by. Let me go on to the second point, strategic thinking. You're going to say, I know all about strategic thinking. What does that mean? There is a shortage of strategic thinkers in the business world. And I'll try to explain what that means and how you can become a strategic thinker. It takes time and experience to develop strategic thinking skills. When you come out of school, if you think you have strategic thinking skills, I'll tell you, you don't. And it's probably not going to be for 10 or 15 years that you have those skills. But let me tell you how to develop them, because it gives you a competitive edge. Step one, and you're going to say, this is a strange step in the learning process. Understand how the learning process works and apply it in your work. Now let me give you an example. When I was in graduate school getting my MBA, I took a class from a guy named Telly. I don't remember his first name, and I checked out of the class because it was so ridiculously hard. It was a general management class. But he said something in the first lecture that I don't remember any of the other professors I had in graduate school. I only remember him, and I didn't even finish his class. And he didn't even stay with the university. He said, let me tell you how to learn. And what he had done is he said, management theory is a dynamic moving theory, and he brought in about 3 or 4 phone book-sized books that he had copied and bound, and they were all about 50 bucks a piece. And he said, we're going to read all of these things. And he wrote on the board, he said, this is your final exam question. Just come and take it. You don't have to come to class. I'm going to be here every Monday. I'm going to lecture for 4 hours, and then I'm going to go home, and here's your final exam. So if you don't want to bother to come, don't come. Okay, and I thought, boy, this is going to be an interesting class. That's why I checked out. He said, this is how you learn. And I'm going to apply this to business. He says you have to read the materials and become familiar with the materials. How many of you skate through your classes and don't read it, you study for the tests? That's not part of this. You have to read the materials and understand them. Then you have to memorize the salient points. Then he says you're in a position to conceptualize, to take all of these relevant facts and put them together and determine a direction in a logical pattern. Now, Telly didn't put the last one on there. I've added that from my years of experience. You've got to be able to teach it. I've learned that I've gone through the first 3 points but haven't been able to teach it from a religious point of view. There are some things I understand about the gospel that I have had revealed to me that I don't have the ability to teach yet. Nor maybe should I. But to teach it is an important thing in business because you've got to teach your point of view to your peers to get support. Let me tell you what step 2 is. Put time into learning all aspects of the business. That means when you walk into a business, you have some career planning. Okay? And you're going to say, oh, how do I affect that? I'll tell you that in a minute. And lastly, put it together and stress test it. When we built vehicles, we put them on test tracks. You can't imagine the testing we do to vehicles. We have a sled that you put the vehicles on, and we have gone over train tracks and measured the bumps on the train tracks, and the cars sit on there and it shakes it just like the train track shakes it. And then we test the vehicle to see if anything came loose or if it was able to go that far. Wind tunnels, you've seen those on some of the advertising. All kinds of 50,000, 70,000, 120,000 mile test drives. We have people driving vehicles around test tracks 24 hours a day for months to test what breaks down when. We stress test the vehicles, and you know the crash testing we do, and hitting the vehicles into barriers to see how they fold up. When a vehicle is hit from the rear, it's designed so that the fuel tank folds under the back axle so it doesn't go into the axle and explode. Do you know the vehicle is designed that way? Do you know a vehicle on a front-end crash is designed so that the engine will go in a certain place as the vectors of force push the metal back? Stress test. That's what I mean. And you have to stress test your theories and your decisions in business. Here are some of the pieces of a business. And each business has different ones, but these are general. I'm giving a general type of a theory here. Marketing and sales. That's an important part. Accounting. Some people would like to do without accounting. Manufacturing and supply. How do you get the parts to the plant? Right before the plants need them, just in time. You've read about that in your textbooks. Product development and the customer. Management and finance. You'll notice I put finance back there. I'm a finance guy. What's the difference between a finance guy and an accountant? It's where they look. Accountants look backwards. Everything that an accountant reports on is something that's actually happened. A finance guy takes all of that information and looks forward into the plan of the business. Okay? That's not all the definition that everybody uses in that. And then I put the customer out there. Are they part of a business? Any successful business looks at the customer's needs. What does marketing sales optimize? What do they do? What do they want to please? They want low price and lots of advertising and marketing money. Marketing sales, that's all they want. We want the cheapest vehicle out there, we want to advertise it every day, and we want big incentives on the vehicle because it helps them do their job easier, doesn't it? What's the key driver in accounting? All they care about is reporting the numbers on time, consistent with generally accounted GAAP principles, general accounting principles, and report them on time. Manufacturing and supply, do you know what they're interested in? Quality manufacturing process with low costs and high efficiencies. I was in an executive meeting once in South America, and manufacturing in the company we were in, the joint venture we were in, was run by Volkswagen. And marketing and sales was run by Ford. And the manufacturing guys said, we define quality for the customer by the manufacturing process. And if our process is right, our quality is good. And I said, customer could care less about your manufacturing process. All they care about is what went wrong with my vehicle because I'm out in the middle of nowhere and my vehicle quit. I said, you tell him about your process. The customer defines whether the quality is there in the product. But to manufacturing, their mindset is, get my process right, and then my quality's okay. They don't define it as the customer defines it. Product development, they're interested in the best design and the best looking product. Do you know what a product development engineer is interested in an automotive company? Car and Driver, Car of the Year award. If they can get that Car of the Year award, they have accomplished what they were set out for. Cost, who cares? They care about the external awards. Management and finance, they've got to meet with the Wall Street guys. They've got to look at the earning potential of the business, and they've got to keep the shareholders off their back and keep the real value of the business high. And that's what they're focused on. Do you know what the customer wants? Who is really defining this whole thing? He wants low price, high quality, best design. Okay, he wants a piece of all of those. But nobody's focusing just on that piece. So let me give you a couple examples about strategic planning. If I were to draw this correctly, I should draw a big circle around all of these except the customer and call that big circle the customer, shouldn't I? Because they're really the king in this case. So when you're in business in strategic planning, you have to understand the needs of every one of these areas. So when you start your career planning, it means you've got to move around in the business. If you stay in accounting all your life, are you going to ever understand the customer? No, you're going to be able to understand all of the rules of accounting, but you're not going to understand the customer. If you stay in manufacturing, you're going to understand what marketing and sales does? No. So if you want to be a strategic thinker, it means you have to bring all of the pieces of the business together so that you can make the best decision that optimizes the effects of the business. So let me give you a couple examples of how this doesn't work. I'm going to give you a lack of strategic focus. We had a plant in London, in the Dagenham area, and it built small trucks that had cab-over trucks. And British Telecom loved these trucks because they were small, they could get in the small streets in London, they could run around, and do you know what? They came in and ordered 5,000 of them from us. We need 5,000 trucks. But we only want so many trucks a week. Okay, take a year, it was over a year, divided by 52, 5,000 trucks, they wanted about 100 trucks a week. So I was scheduling all the plants in Europe, telling them what to build. And I sent this out and said, 100 trucks a week, this is your schedule. Put it in your schedule. The plant manager, he said, let me tell you what happens in a plant. British Telecom has this weird kind of orange, burnt orange color that goes on the trucks. Okay? So the plant manager thinking, I'm going to reduce my cost and increase my efficiency. Every time I have to change the color in the paint booths, I have to blow the lines out and clean them. And I waste X number of gallons of paint. So the best thing for me to do is build all 5,000 in a week. They'll be high quality because it's going to be the same vehicle. And I'll be able to those paint booth people will just paint to their heart's content that burnt orange, and I'll never have to waste all that paints that I would have to do 52 times in the year. So unbeknownst to us, he built 5,000 vehicles. Now, 5,000 vehicles takes a lot of parking area, doesn't it? So he built 5,000 vehicles. Boy, they came out. His efficiencies that month looked great. He was a hero. Do you know what happens to parked vehicles? Their batteries go dead and their tires they get flat spots in them. Not necessarily flat. They get flat spots so that the tires carry a permanent flat spot if you don't rotate them periodically. So we got 5,000 vehicles sitting out there. And then we had a hailstorm. Okay? We had to rework 4,500 vehicles. Put new batteries, and we had to fix tires. What was the best thing for the company? You build them 100 a week, you clear the lines. Somebody sub-optimized. He wanted to look good in manufacturing, and so he did something that actually in the long run was worst for the company. I could have had his head, but I'm going to be nice today and tell you. So that's what happens when you sub-optimize. Guess how you know if you're sub-optimizing? He only knew manufacturing. If he'd have known all pieces of the business, he wouldn't have made that decision. His strategic thinking was short. Only the people. At Ford Motor Company, I only held one job longer than 18 months. Now, some would argue I screwed them up so bad that they moved me on. But they moved me every 18 months to a new assignment, and that gave me, I thought, a cross-functional view of business. And so if you go into a company, you have to ask yourself, can I move around and get that, or where can I get that experience? This is an entrepreneurial class. Jim, you have to do all of those things in a business, don't you? And there's one way to learn it, and that's to get experience in it. I'll give you another example. Ford North America. Brother Richie talked about the restructuring. I'm going to give, again, this is all personal examples today. I was the controller at Mazda in Japan. I'd been sent there to restructure Mazda. We'd restructured Europe, we'd restructured South America. I'd gone to Mazda, we restructured Mazda, we were back to profitability. All of a sudden we get called back to the US. Ford North America's hemorrhaging. Cash, they lost $8 billion the year before. They'd come through an Explorer tire issue that had left the brand image way down. Our quality was lousy. We were focusing on big vehicles. Our car business had basically gone out of business. We were pumping 2 plants worth of Tauruses out and pumping them into rental businesses because we owned Hertz and Budget, and we were just dumping them in there. So the Taurus became a rental car rather than a family car. And they were hemorrhaging cash. What do we do? This was 2004. So I came back as a controller. I remember sitting home one weekend doing a business plan on my computer in my study. I took the business plan they had, looked at the assumptions, and costed it out myself. We were headed for a train wreck, and the conclusions that they were drawing were not the right conclusions. Okay, now, I was a controller, so controllers are looked at as a pain in the neck in a business. But I came back into the executive group the next week. First of all, presented it to the guy who was running North America. Do you know what his response was? Your numbers are wrong. So I came back the next week and said, my numbers aren't wrong. We got a problem. We brought it into the executive group. They all said, you finance guys need to get some optimism. your numbers are wrong. I said, my numbers aren't wrong. This is 1 against 8. Okay, and all these guys outrank me in the pecking order of the business. Again, Gerhard Klein story. I said, my numbers are right. Just at that time, we started to see a spike in oil prices. All of a sudden, our sales started to drop. All of a sudden, everybody remembered, well, maybe Greg's got some ideas. So we started looking at it. They decided they needed to restructure North America before the business went out of business. So for the next year and a half, I spent, as part of a team of about 4 or 5 people, restructuring the company. And what restructuring means is looking at the total business, trying to figure out where it's at, where we need to move it to stay in business. The guy who was leading North America, he was out. Product development guy, he was out. We brought back in a guy named Mark Fields from Europe who was running the Volvo Land Rover Jaguar business in Europe for us. Those were companies we owned. Mark Fields. He was about 8 years younger than I was. Absolutely brilliant. Most brilliant mind I ever worked with in business. Bob Shanks, another finance guy, came back, and we started to look at Ford Motor Company critically. And it was tough. And every day was very trying. We spent lots of hours, sometimes 6, 7 days a week, looking at that. We said the number one thing is our products are lousy. Our design is lousy. We're good in trucks, but in cars we don't have anything. And guess what? Oil prices are going to go, and our maximum cost was $70 a barrel. You know, it went up to almost $150 a barrel. So we way undercalled where it was going to go. We said we've got to change our footprint. Our complexity in our vehicles is too much. Manufacturing complexity, we've got to take our costs out. We have too many plants. We came up with a proposal. Shut down 18 plants, lay off 40,000 people. I couldn't sleep at night with that. They could potentially been your dads, your granddads, that we were laying off. But we knew if we didn't take the tough choices strategically, that the business would go out of business. We sold off Hertz. We sold off Budget. Ultimately, they've sold off Jaguar. They sold off Land Rover. They've sold off Volvo. Put the cash into the balance sheet. We put $25 billion into the balance sheet. Do you know why Ford wasn't down to Washington going like this? Because they had some strategic thinkers who looked at the business critically in a time before the crisis occurred. Fascinating. I asked them if I could retire. They said no. I created all the executive compensation packages for the company, and I was always the #1 candidate for each of these packages, and it got to be a joke within the business. I said, I don't want to work 20 hours a day, 7 days a week for the rest of my life. I'd rather go do other things. And so eventually they came and said, look, if you'll stay till the public announcements of this, we'll let you go. And so in February, we announced it to the Wall Street analysts, to the public, and we left. I'd done what I'd been sent there to do, and went on to other things, which I'm grateful that I've been able to. That's what strategic focus is. Strategic planning is understanding the business from all aspects and being able to develop the plan that optimizes the resources of your business. So as you look at going into a business, I mean, I don't even know how you guys are internalizing what I'm saying today, but at some point in time in your career, you'll be able to look back, and you'll never remember what we say here today, but you'll be able to look back and say, hey, there's some value in what's there. And I think Brother Richie can probably emphasize that. Where should I work when I get out? Any place that will hire me, right? In today's market, good grief, anybody that'll hire me, I'll be happy to go work there. Or who's offering the most money? I'm interested. In college, most of the time I was on the National Advisory Board of the University of Utah Graduate School. business. There was a bunch of business people they used on the National Advisory Board. I had to resign from that because I'm never in Salt Lake anymore. But when we met with students and that up there, they always looked up where the highest salaries came out of school, and that's what they emphasized in. So I say that with some degree of understanding. There are 4 things I just want to discuss. I've got probably enough time to do this. You have to create a personal business plan, and you have to create that now, and you'll modify it as you go through your career, just like you modify what your expectations are on your degree here at school as you take different classes and you find different interests. You have to assess your strengths and your interests. You have to ask yourself whether you want to work for a large company, a small company, for yourself. Do I plan to stay with one company or rotate around the first 20 years of my career? And am I willing to relocate? Let's talk about those. First thing is you have to honestly assess your capabilities. We are so dishonest with ourselves sometimes when we look at ourselves. We have to ask ourselves, do I work well in a structured environment? Can I go into an office and be happy, or do I need to be out doing all these kind of things in with the customer? Can I work well in a structured environment? That's what that means. Am I really an entrepreneur at heart? Do I want my own business? I've got a son-in-law. He works for Harrah's now in Las Vegas. He's the purchasing manager for that casino chain. He wants to be an entrepreneur in the worst way. I don't think he'll ever be happy until he's got his own business and running his own thing. But in today's market, it's a tough time to start a business. And so he's doing what he can in that area. What's my tolerance for risk? Do you lay awake at night wondering if you can pay the bills, or does it not bother you that people call you and say, hey, your payment's due? Okay, tolerance for risk. Am I better at details or strategic? Can I take an accounting statement and foot it? Do you know what? All those things you learn in Accounting 101, computers do them nowadays. They don't even do them that way. I had to add them up with just a little calculator when I was in college. Now, I don't think I've ever seen a trial balance that doesn't come out of an accounting system. Okay? Where do I want to be in 20 years? You ask yourself that question. There is nothing, I'm not suggesting anybody has to be president of any company. You may be happy being an accounting manager or accounting supervisor someplace in a large company, and that's just fine. But you have to kind of set your expectations as you go into these type of opportunities. And I'm interested in the subject. Some people go in it for money, remember? I always said the day that I was bored with my job is the day that I leave. Every day I got up looking forward to, sometimes I didn't look forward to the challenge that was there, but I enjoyed what I did. And I think you have to enjoy what you do. Large company or small company? Am I expecting to be a broad manager or management responsibility early in my career? If you do, go to a small company. In a large company, you don't have a prayer of getting into a huge management structure early in your career. There are too many people. I came over as the chief financial officer of the Polynesian Culture Center to restructure it a couple years ago. Okay? The center has 250 people in there. I had more than that working for me at Mazda in one organization. So, small company or large company? How patient am I to work under less competent people? Generally in a large company, they'll pay bigger salaries and they'll get more competent people. Smaller company, you may have incompetent people. Can you learn to work under them and put your time in and learn what you can? Don't know. That you have to ask yourself. Does the boss have a son or daughter? That's key, because just when you're primed to move up in the organization, somebody may slot in the daughter or the son who is not as competent as you are. I remember when Edsel Ford, the son of Henry Ford, was made a director in product development. He didn't have a clue what the automotive business was all about. He'd never been there. Billy Ford Jr., William Clay Ford's son, who was the largest shareholder in Ford Motor Company, came in as the chairman of the company, chairman of the board. Do you know what he did all this time? He managed the Detroit Lions. And the president of the company ran the business. Okay, so you got to be very careful, because the Ford family owns the Detroit Lions, and you can see what a fine job he did with the Detroit Lions. Fortunately, he didn't run Ford Motor Company. So does the boss have a daughter? What do I really want to learn from the experience? Ask yourself as you get into it. Do I plan to stay with one company or rotate around in the first 20 years? Generally, today, people rotate companies. When I came out of school, you stayed with them. At Mazda, we would have a recruiting meeting every year. We would invite in about 300 or 400 people, and man, when those Japanese said, I'm going to work in that company, they worked in that company for life. Those of you who are Japanese, is that true? There's not a lot of rotation around in some of those large companies. Who's going to be around in 20 years? What specific specialty do I expect to acquire at the business I am considering? Do they offer what you want to? I used to tell people at Ford Motor Company, you can change careers without changing companies. Because we ran so many, Ford Motor Company, I was a controller of North American operations, $75 billion in revenue. Okay, that's with the B. The only people that doesn't impress are the government people who spend that daily. Am I and my spouse willing to live in one place, or am I going to stay in Laie? Okay? And where are my next moves and why? And finally, am I willing to rotate? My wife and I, my poor wife and I, we said our first foreign assignment is when we moved from Salt Lake to Detroit. That was my first foreign assignment. And we got accustomed to Detroit. And then after about 12 years, remember I said you're not going to get moved into those executive positions for a while? After about 12 years, they asked us to go to South America. And we lived in Sao Paulo for 3.5 years. Then we left the company to preside over a mission. We came back and they gave me Asia Pacific. So living in Detroit, I was the head finance guy for Australia, New Zealand, Taiwan, Thailand, all the Asia Pacific Rim. I spent a lot of time on planes, okay? And I know all about jet lag and how to sleep so I don't get jet lag, okay? After 3 years, or a year and a half in that, they made me the controller for worldwide direct markets. That's every place Ford doesn't have assembly plants. Out of Detroit again. But I had all of Africa and all of the Middle East. I had an office in Dubai that I'd stop in to see 3 or 4 times a year. Okay? All the places we didn't have, Cambodia, Vietnam, those countries were all under that responsibility. Then we were asked to go to Europe. We had the European responsibility and took the family to Europe, lived in London. From there, asked to go to Japan. We lived in Hiroshima, where the headquarters for Mazda is globally. And then we came back to the US. My poor wife just keeps getting drug all over the world. Are you willing to do that? Some people are not. But decide that early on, because there are some companies that you can stay in one location your whole time. So as you look for a company, think about, am I willing to move? And where are my next moves and why? Again, focus where you have strengths, do something you enjoy to do, don't do it for the money, and decide early in your career what you're willing to sacrifice for the career in ways of location and time. If you want to move up in a business and run a business someday, don't think that you're going to work from 8 to 5 and do that. Okay? Don't delude yourself with that fact. You will work long hours and you'll commit it. You have to decide yourself what you want to find that's important in life. Let me suggest what success is. Success in life is not measured by your position in the company or the amount of money you make. Unfortunately, that's what the world thinks. What position you held, how much money you make, where you live, what you drive, what you wear. Okay, that's how the world defines success. On this side of a career, I define success is measured on how well you keep your covenants, your gospel covenants, in the journey of life. And all decisions that you make in your family, church, and business should be monitored by this principle. Okay. I'm done. Questions? Nobody dares. Please. Well, you express an interest. The question is, how do you help direct your career to move around in a business when you get there? Talk to your HR people. Say, look, I'm interested in learning about different aspects of the business. I'd like to stay here for a couple of years. And then could I move to marketing and sales? And after a couple of years, say, hey, I'd like to go get some experience in manufacturing and supply. Don't be afraid to open your mouth and ask that question. That's a good question. Why is it important for me to live around the world? Do you know what the most common color of a vehicle is in Germany? Everybody says black, right? No, the Germans like yellow and white. Do you know what it is in Italy? Gray. Everybody thinks that the Italians is very outgoing and yeah, I like all these flamboyant colors. They like gray and black. The Germans are very stoic in their approach. Guess what? They like the brighter colors. Please, I had a question back here. You don't know that unless you've lived there. Please.
I don't know if I missed it, but where did you go to school? What was your major, and how did you end up in sports?
I went to school at the University of Utah. I did an undergraduate degree in biology and chemistry, and then realized I couldn't support a family on that degree. Okay? I didn't do very good strategic planning. So I went up to the business school and took an accounting class and liked it. And they had a 2-year MBA program, so I applied and was accepted there, and I did an MBA. Ford came to campus and recruited. Some of you who are from Mongolia know Richard Cook. Richard Cook recruited me out of Ford Motor Company, or out of the University of Utah to go back to Ford. That's how I got there, and that was my credentials. Please.
How has networking with people that you know in the business helped you create?
The question is, how does networking help you? I'm not a very good example of that, because I'm not a real good networker. Okay? I was not the kind of guy who went out on the weekends and went drinking with the guys after work, although I did go out with them occasionally because I was always the designated driver. Okay, and that's one advantage. They always loved to have me along. But the point is, I was not a good networker. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean you shouldn't be a good networker. But there were a lot of people who focused just on networking rather than the skill set. I always figured if I'm good enough, they're going to notice me and move me along. Some people were, in Portuguese, they call puxa-sacos. If some of you speak Portuguese, it means brown nosers, okay? And those were the people that were always trying to get ahead by their relationships rather than their performance in the business. I always focused on business performance. Please.
What kind of car do you drive?
A Ford, of course. I have an executive compensation that they give me 2 cars each year. And so right now I'm driving President Wheelwright's truck because I ordered a car when we realized we were called to come here at the end of August. I placed an order for a new Taurus to be delivered to Hawaii, but they haven't scheduled it or built it yet. So it's going to be another month or two before it arrives. But rather than ship a vehicle, I'll let Ford ship it, and it was time for me to turn the vehicle anyway.
What did you learn in school that carried you through all these things?
What did I learn in school?
Carries you through all the things.
Let me give you an example of this. And I hope, yeah. Okay, I'll give you an example of this. When you go to school, your professors will talk to you about cost of capital and all those things. I never encountered that in a career at Ford Motor Company. Okay? All that stuff is nice, theoretical stuff. The main thing I was interested in, and I used to recruit heavily at BYU and University of Utah and hire graduate MBAs every year. We'd hire 10, 12 people out of those schools every year to come back to Ford Finance. We would give them a business case. And our interviews were made up of two things. We'd talk normal business, or a normal interview. How are you? Tell me about yourself. Tell me what you do in this circumstance. But we would send them out a business case that we would develop. And they would come and present to us what they would do in that business case. That's when I learned whether they had the intellectual horsepower to be there. It wasn't just the smooth talkers, articulators that got jobs there. It was the people who had good strategic thinking skills, logical thinking skills. What did I learn in school? Learn how to say, amidst all of the facts, what is the most important thing driving this? And when you can do that, then you drill down on that piece and let the other stuff just go to the side. That takes experience, but that's what you need to do. Now, I think I'm out of time, Jim. Thank you. Appreciate you having me come, and good luck.